Hello, my name is Lewis Campbell. I specialize in data sync and also apps that work when the internet doesn't necessarily work or the network is malfunctioning. I saw an article recently on Hacker News. I've got it up here on the screen. iCloud Drive silently deletes your content. So I'm not going to read it all. I'm just sort of going to hit the main points of what this person's problem is. The blog is by Dominique Meyer. So he says he was writing a paper and what he was working on had just vanished. And another issue he had was he was editing code in Xcode, and suddenly the file changed from underneath him again, and a bunch of errors came up. So his recent changes to the files that he's been writing to has been erased, and he realized this was due to iCloud Drive. So iCloud Drive apparently detected a conflict and chose a different version of a file from the one he was currently working on, which essentially meant that Dominique lost his data because of the way iCloud Drive chose to resolve the conflicts. He goes on to contrast with Dropbox. So Dropbox also obviously manages file conflicts. It's another product in the same category, but the way Dropbox does it is it stores the conflicting files side by side. Whereas the way iDrive Cloud does it is with some kind of internal mechanism. As I understand it, in iDrive Cloud, a conflicted file will still show up as one file. But if you open it in certain supported applications, it will open up a dialog that asks you to pick a version. However, he opened the file in iCloud Drive in an application that doesn't support this. Interestingly enough, including Xcode, which is an Apple product. So Apple's product doesn't support its own file resolution, but in doing this, what I think happened is it arbitrarily picked a version. But look, at the end of the day, the end result was iCloud Drive did some syncing, overwrote some data that he was working on, and it was gone. He could not grab it, and he makes the insightful observation, I feel, one I've seen often. Masking version conflicts might appear user-friendly, but it has catastrophic consequences. And I agree, in designing sort of apps that sync or apps that work offline or apps that work in bad network conditions, there is a tension on the one hand between not losing any of the user's data, and on the other hand, you don't necessarily want to show them a bunch of conflicts. Because conflicts are scary, right? And, people want things to just work, but the flip side of making things just work, we'll get into that. So I thought that was a really good article, and I did want to confirm something. So I went and had a look at Apple's official documentation of iCloud Drive and how it deals with conflicts, right? So it confirms what Dominique's article says. When they go online, when you view a document, a message appears asking you to select the document versions you want to keep. He points out that only certain apps do this. But the interesting bit is here, in that you select the version you want to keep when you open a file on the iCloud Drive, but the version that you don't select is then deleted from all iCloud drives. So I think that's the issue he ran into, and I did a bit of a diagram with what I think happened on his Mac and happened on his iDrive Cloud. I keep wanting to call it, hang on a minute, iCloud Drive. Yeah, Apple names. But anyway, here's what I think happened. So let's say he was working on a file that just had, I don't know, his favorite animal, right? So he's on his Mac, he's got cat and dog. The iCloud Drive version also has cat and dog. iCloud decided to keep dog and delete cat. I'm not quite sure how this happened. It's not immediately clear from either his article or the Apple explanation, but I believe, it's possible for this to have happened. Meanwhile, he is working on the cat file, right? And so what happened is iCloud Drive decided to keep dog and delete cat. It synced to the changes, and all of a sudden the cat he was working on was replaced with dog. And so that would explain why he all of a sudden noticed paragraphs missing, and also he noticed a bunch of errors where errors were not before, because underneath him, essentially, the file was changed without sort of any conflicts brought to his attention, right? And I would like to point out, I think he also mentioned a file was deleted underneath him. So I have this sort of replace cat with dog. Remember that these versions could also be what's called a tombstone. A tombstone represents a file that has been deleted. So in replacing, one version with another version, the other version it replaces it with could be the tombstone, which essentially would show up as a file deletion. Right? So there is a different way of doing this, which you will always keep your data. And I have a small simulation of it here. So let's call the local node, I don't know, a Mac, and the remote node an iDrive, an iCloud drive. I'll get it right eventually. An iCloud drive. Okay, so on the local node, let's say we're talking about cats, and on the remote node, we're talking about dogs. This is a file that's our favorite animal or something, and this is what we've written. Right, so the Mac and the cloud have different versions. So this is called a multi-value register. It's quite an old thing. We'll get into that later. But a key thing is it doesn't really lose data. So I hit the sync button, and this is what shows up on both the local and the remote. So it's the same thing, right? When it syncs, the same thing appears on both devices. And what appears is two values, and this represents the different versions that Dominique was talking about. And it also represents a conflict. If you have two versions of the same file, you have a conflict because we're not sure which version, is the winner. Okay, so let's say you see this conflict, cat, dog, and you reiterate that cats are your favorite animal or whatever, and you click assign. And then you synchronize the change. So in the iCloud change, in the iCloud sync, data will be deleted, but with a multi-value register, the conflict still exists. So the reason is with a multi-value register, both nodes have to agree on what the value is. If there's any disagreement, it just shows all the potential values. So there's a tension here. There's the trade-off that Dominique mentioned, right? It's do we want to lose data or do we want to avoid showing the user conflicts? And the multi-value register is very much, we keep the conflicts until they're resolved, even if we show you the conflicts all the time. So there's still a conflict here, right? So how do you get rid of the conflict, you may ask? Both nodes have to agree. My local node, my Mac or whatever, has to agree. And the iCloud drive also has to agree. So if we do that, if we say both nodes agree to cat, and then we sync them, there's no conflict because both nodes have decided cat is the winning revision, right? So yeah, that is an alternate technique of how you might want to do data sync if you don't want to lose any data. So let me just zoom in here. I'm not going to read this whole paper, but I do want to point out I did not invent that technique. It's a very old technique. In fact, I don't know if you can see the date up here. May 1983. It's over 4 decades old. And yeah, it's a paper called Detection of Mutual Inconsistency in Distributed Systems, and I want to draw your attention to one particular article. Remember, 4 decades ago, that I think is still very pertinent, and I'm going to read it out loud. Network partitioning can completely destroy mutual consistency in the worst case, and this fact has led to a certain amount of restrictiveness, vagueness, and even nervousness in past discussions of how it may be handled. Again, 1983, this is sort of not a new thing. Why is this still happening? So, I imagine Apple engineers working on this know about multi-version registers. They know that the sync solution they came up with could lose data. I am guessing product overruled them and kind of said, yeah, but we can't show our users conflicts because conflicts are terrifying and they might not want to use our program, right? But again, that tension. Do you draw conflicts to the user's attention, or do you just delete the data when you don't want to show them a dialogue, right? And, maybe the engineers are bringing this up, and then, Steve Jobs wanders in and he's eating a pear, and he's like, think different, and he throws the pear at them, and they went with the option that doesn't show a user a bunch of conflicts. And I guess the question is that the right decision? I don't know. I would say it's the right decision. I would say it's the wrong decision if you don't want to lose your users' data. If underneath it all, if data integrity is the most important thing to you, then Apple's solution was incorrect. And it's really up for every product team and every software team to decide whether keeping the user's data is paramount or whether it's okay to delete it sometimes from underneath them, all in the service of making a simpler UI. That's for you to decide. Alright, that's the end of my breakdown. Thank you very much.